Welcome to Her True Stories, where truth is stranger than fiction. If you're ready for a story that will make your blood boil and your heart race, then you've come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now because today's story is about a 63-year-old woman named Miriam Callahan who discovered that sometimes the deadliest enemies are the ones sleeping under your own roof. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this tale of family betrayal, hidden wealth, and the most devastating revenge you'll ever hear. My name is Miriam Callahan, and at 63 years old, I thought I understood the true price of invisibility. When you spend 25 years building a secret real estate empire while everyone treats you like a peasant, you learn that respect doesn't just come naturally. It demands attention, commands presence, and sometimes lands on your front lawn. But I never imagined that the greatest disrespect would come from my own daughter laughing when her husband called me poor. The modest two-bedroom house I'd called home for decades sat on what most people would consider an unremarkable street in our small Texas town. The paint around the window frames had been peeling for years. The front steps creaked under even the lightest footstep, and that old sedan in my driveway hadn't seen a car wash in months. To anyone driving by, it looked exactly like what you'd expect from a widow getting by on Social Security and maybe a small pension. And that's exactly what I wanted them to think. What they couldn't see was the carefully maintained portfolio of real estate investments scattered across 3 states, the stock holdings that had grown beyond my wildest dreams, and the bank accounts that would make their jaws drop. I had been living a double life for over 2 decades, and I was damn good at it. You see, when my husband died 25 years ago, leaving me with 2 young children, Elise, who was 7, and Ryan, who was 11, and barely enough insurance money to cover the funeral, I made a choice. I could either feel sorry for myself and struggle for the rest of my life, or I could figure out how to never be vulnerable again. I chose option 2. The first few years were genuinely difficult. I worked as a bookkeeper during the day and took in sewing at night, barely making ends meet while my children grew up thinking this was normal. But during those late nights, when I was hemming other people's clothes for extra money, I was also studying. Reading every book I could find about investments, real estate markets, and financial planning. My breakthrough came when I was 32. A small commercial building downtown came up for auction. The previous owner had defaulted on his mortgage. The building was run down, in a questionable neighborhood, and most investors weren't interested. But I saw potential. I scraped together every penny I had, borrowed against my meager savings, and bought it for a fraction of its actual value. I spent every weekend for 6 months fixing it up myself, learning plumbing and electrical work from library books and the occasional helpful contractor who took pity on a single mother trying to make something of herself. When I finally rented it out to a small accounting firm, the monthly income was more than I made at my day job. That's when I understood the power of leverage and renovation. While other single mothers were using their spare time to date or socialize, I was attending real estate investment seminars and studying market trends until my eyes burned. My children never knew why I insisted on generic cereal and secondhand clothes, why we never took family vacations, or why I drove that same reliable car for 15 years. They just saw a mother who was careful with money. Maybe too careful. Every spare dollar that didn't go towards school clothes or soccer cleats or birthday parties went into my growing real estate empire. I started with that one commercial building, then moved to residential properties. Small houses that needed work in neighborhoods that were just beginning to turn around. I would buy them, fix them up on weekends, and either rent them out for steady income or sell them for quick profits that I immediately reinvested. The pattern continued for years, accelerating as my expertise and capital base grew. Buy low, improve, rent or sell high, reinvest. While other parents were taking family vacations or buying new cars, I was quietly building an empire that stretched across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. By the time Elise graduated college and Ryan started his accounting career, I owned 23 rental properties across 3 states and had a stock portfolio that had grown exponentially through careful reinvestment of my rental income. My net worth had crossed into the millions sometime around my 45th birthday, but I kept living like I was still counting every penny. The fear of losing everything had been drilled into me by those early years of genuine struggle. Even after my financial advisor Marcus started using words like wealthy and well-positioned, I still shopped with coupons and drove that same reliable sedan. My children never questioned my modest lifestyle because it was all they'd ever known. To them, I was just mom, the woman who worked hard and worried about money and always put everyone else's needs before her own. They loved me, I know they did, but they also took me for granted in the way children often do with parents who make sacrifice look effortless. Ryan had grown into a successful accountant with his own family, living in a beautiful suburban home about an hour away. He was a good son who visited regularly, never questioning my circumstances, always treating me with the respect and genuine affection that came from understanding what I'd sacrificed to raise him. He remembered those difficult early years and never forgot what I'd done to ensure he could go to college debt-free. Then there was Elise, my beautiful 32-year-old daughter, who had inherited her father's charm and what I'd hoped was my practical nature. But somewhere along the way, Elise had developed ideas about what she deserved from life that didn't always match what she was willing to work for. More importantly, she seemed to have forgotten the struggles of our early years, treating our modest lifestyle as somehow embarrassing rather than the foundation that had made her comfortable life possible. When she married Adrian Pierce 2 years ago, I knew we were heading for trouble. Adrian came from old money. Real money, the kind that came with country club memberships and vacation homes and trust funds that meant never having to worry about anything practical. His family's wealth was generational, inherited rather than earned, which gave him a particular kind of arrogance that I found deeply irritating. From our first meeting, he made it clear that he considered himself to be doing my daughter a tremendous favor by marrying into what he saw as our humble circumstances. He was too well-bred for outright rudeness, of course. Instead, Adrian communicated his opinions through subtle digs and backhanded compliments that made my skin crawl. During their engagement dinner at an expensive restaurant that I genuinely couldn't afford at the time, he made a toast about elevating Elise's lifestyle and giving her the experiences she truly deserves. The implication was crystal clear. Her current family couldn't provide those things. At their wedding, held at his family's exclusive country club, I felt like a charity case in my department store dress, while his relatives whispered about Elise's humble background and how refreshing it was that Adrian was marrying for love rather than social status. I smiled through the entire reception, danced when appropriate, and gave a heartfelt speech about how happy I was for the couple. But inside, I was taking careful notes about every slight and condescending comment. Adrian treated me like an embarrassment to be tolerated rather than family to be welcomed. He never directly insulted me in those early days, but his attitude spoke volumes. When I offered to help with wedding planning, he suggested I focus on the smaller, more manageable details, while his mother and the professional planner handled the complex decisions. When I gave Elise a beautiful antique jewelry box that had belonged to my own mother, Adrian commented on how charming it was to have authentic vintage family pieces, making it sound like I'd given them junk from a garage sale. The worst part wasn't Adrian's attitude toward me. The worst part was watching my daughter slowly begin to adopt his perspective. Elise had never been embarrassed by our modest circumstances before, but after spending time with Adrian's family and their casual wealth, she started making comments about my outdated clothing choices and stopped inviting me to upscale restaurants, claiming she was being considerate of my limited budget. She started speaking to me in the same slightly patronizing tone that Adrian used, as if I were a child who needed things explained in simple terms. Worse, she began making excuses for my absence from their social events, telling people that I was uncomfortable in fancy settings, or that I preferred staying home. I told myself it was just an adjustment period, that Elise was figuring out how to balance her loyalty to her original family with her commitment to her new one. These transitions took time, and marriages required compromise. But deep down, I was watching my daughter become someone I didn't recognize, and it broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. The breaking point came on Christmas Eve, 2024. I had spent weeks preparing what I hoped would be the perfect family gathering. The house was decorated with every ornament we'd collected over the years, including the handmade ones Elise and Ryan had created as children. I'd cooked for 3 days straight, preparing all their favorite dishes and several new recipes I'd found in magazines. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's good china, the special set that only came out for holidays and truly important occasions. Ryan arrived first with his wife Sarah and their 2 children, and for a while, everything felt wonderfully normal. Sarah helped in the kitchen while the kids played with new toys I'd been secretly buying and hiding for months. The house filled with laughter and the warm sounds of family togetherness that I'd been craving throughout the increasingly strained months since Elise's marriage. When Elise and Adrian finally arrived, fashionably late as had become their custom, Adrian swept into my modest living room, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. He made the appropriate small talk, complimented my decorations in that slightly surprised tone that suggested he hadn't expected them to be adequate, and accepted a glass of wine while subtly looking around my home like an anthropologist studying the living conditions of a fascinating but primitive culture. Dinner itself went smoothly at first. The food was excellent, if I do say so myself, and the conversation flowed naturally between updates on work, the grandchildren's school activities, and plans for the new year. I was actually starting to relax and think that maybe I'd been overthinking Adrian's attitude toward me and our family. Then came the moment that would change everything forever. We were discussing Ryan's recent promotion to senior partner at his accounting firm when somehow the conversation shifted to transportation and the practical challenges of modern life. Adrian mentioned that he was considering buying a second car, something sporty for weekend trips to their lake house, and Ryan made a good-natured joke about his wife lobbying for a bigger SUV to handle all the kids' activities and sports equipment. "What about you, Mom?" Elise asked, turning to me with what seemed like genuine interest. "Have you ever thought about getting something newer and more reliable? That old sedan of yours has to be at least 15 years old by now." Before I could formulate an answer, Adrian jumped in with a laugh that had absolutely no warmth or affection in it. "Come on, Elise," he said, his voice dripping with condescension that made everyone at the table shift uncomfortably. "Your mother can't afford a new car. She's doing perfectly fine with what she has, aren't you, Miriam? No need to dream about things that are completely out of reach." The room went completely quiet except for the soft Christmas music playing in the background. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not embarrassment, but a slow-burning anger that started in my chest and spread outward like wildfire through my entire body. Then Adrian delivered the line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Can't afford a car, you poor peasant," he said with a smirk, raising his wine glass in a mock toast. "But hey, at least you've got a roof over your head and food on the table, right? That's more than some people can say." And then, God, this still breaks my heart to remember even now, Elise laughed. Not a surprised giggle or a nervous chuckle that you might excuse as social awkwardness. A real, genuine laugh, like Adrian had just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard in her entire life. My own daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything to raise and educate and support, was laughing at my expense alongside her husband. Ryan looked absolutely mortified and tried desperately to change the subject, but the damage was already done. Sarah stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable with the cruelty she'd just witnessed. The children sensed the tension and stopped their chatter. In that moment, sitting at my own dining room table surrounded by the remnants of the feast I'd spent days preparing, I realized with crystal clarity that my daughter had chosen her side in this family dynamic. And it wasn't mine. I didn't say anything immediately. I simply nodded and smiled and continued eating my dinner as if nothing particularly noteworthy had happened. But inside, something fundamental had shifted permanently. The woman who had spent 25 years putting everyone else's needs and comfort before her own was finally ready to put herself first. After everyone finally left that night, the goodbyes were stilted and awkward, with Ryan shooting apologetic glances in my direction while Adrian seemed completely oblivious to the bomb he dropped. I sat alone in my living room surrounded by wrapping paper and dirty dishes, staring at the remnants of what should have been a beautiful family celebration. But all I could hear was that laugh, my daughter's laugh, echoing in my ears alongside Adrian's cruel words. That's when I made a decision that would change the trajectory of all our lives. It was time for my family to see who I really was. The next morning, Christmas Day, I called my financial advisor, Marcus Reynolds. He was a sharp man in his early 40s who'd been managing my more complex investments for the past 8 years, ever since my portfolio had grown large enough to require professional oversight. Marcus was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my wealth, having watched it grow from substantial to genuinely impressive over our years of working together. When he answered his phone, clearly surprised to hear from me on a holiday, I was already formulating the plan that would turn my family's world upside down. "Miriam," he said, and I could hear his children playing in the background. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Marcus," I said, feeling more decisive and energized than I had in years, "I need to make some strategic arrangements. It's time I started living like the woman I actually am instead of the woman everyone assumes I am." Over the next hour, I outlined my plan to gradually reveal my true financial situation to my family through a series of increasingly obvious lifestyle changes. Nothing too dramatic at first, just subtle hints that there might be significantly more to their mother and grandmother than they'd realized. "Are you absolutely sure about this approach?" Marcus asked when I'd finished explaining. "You've been extremely committed to maintaining privacy about your wealth for so many years. What's changed to make you want to reveal it now?" I thought about Adrian's smirk and Elise's laugh, and my resolve hardened like tempered steel. "What's changed?" I said, "is that I'm tired of being treated like someone's charity case, especially by people who should know better. And I'm tired of hiding my accomplishments as if they were something shameful rather than something to be proud of." The first change was my car, naturally. That 15-year-old sedan that had been the subject of so much mockery was traded in for a brand new Mercedes-Benz E-Class, not the most expensive model available, but definitely a significant statement. When the dealer offered to deliver it to my house with all the paperwork handled professionally, I agreed, knowing that a luxury car transport truck showing up in my driveway would get the neighbors talking, and word would eventually reach my children. Next came strategic home improvements that I'd been putting off for years. I hired the most reputable contractor in town to make some long overdue updates to my property. Fresh paint inside and out, updated fixtures throughout, a complete renovation of the kitchen with granite counters and professional-grade appliances, and a bathroom remodel that transformed my modest master bath into something you'd see in a magazine. I told myself it was just maintenance that needed to be done anyway, but I also made sure to choose finishes and appliances that would be impossible to ignore or explain away as minor touch-ups. I updated my wardrobe systematically, trading my practical department store clothes for pieces from boutiques I'd never dared enter before. I started getting my hair done at the most exclusive salon in town instead of the budget chain I'd been using for years. I even joined the same country club where Adrian's family were longtime members, though I made sure to keep a relatively low profile during my visits. Each individual change was small enough to be explained away if anyone asked direct questions. An unexpected work bonus, a successful side investment, a small inheritance from a distant relative. Good luck with some stock picks. But taken together, they painted an unmistakable picture of a woman whose financial circumstances were improving rapidly and mysteriously. The reactions from my family were exactly what I'd expected and hoped for. Ryan noticed the car first when he stopped by to check on me after New Year's, doing a genuine double-take when he saw it in the driveway. "Mom, is that your car?" he asked, walking around the Mercedes with obvious admiration. "It is indeed," I replied casually. "Did you win the lottery or something? This is gorgeous." When I laughed off his question and smoothly changed the subject to his children's school activities, I could see him filing the information away to think about later. A few weeks later, his wife Sarah mentioned to Elise that she'd driven past my house and couldn't believe how much the renovations were improving the entire property. But it was Adrian's reaction that interested me most. When he and Elise stopped by to see the newly renovated kitchen in late January, he walked through my house with the kind of calculating expression that suggested he was frantically trying to add up numbers in his head. How much had all these improvements cost? Where could this money possibly be coming from? And most importantly, did this unexpected development change anything about the family financial dynamic he thought he understood completely? "Mom," Elise said as she admired the granite countertops and professional-grade stainless steel appliances, "this kitchen is absolutely stunning. It looks like something from those home renovation shows. You must have been saving for years to afford all this." I smiled serenely and continued making coffee in my new espresso machine, a commercial-quality piece of equipment that had cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "You know me, sweetheart," I said. "I've always been very good at managing money and planning for the future." Adrian was studying the expensive fixtures and custom cabinetry with the kind of intense attention he usually reserved for his most important sales presentations. "This renovation must have cost a serious fortune, Miriam. Are you absolutely sure you can handle the financial obligations? I'd hate for you to get in over your head with payments you can't sustain." The concern in his voice might have been touching if it weren't coming from someone who'd called me a peasant just a few weeks earlier. "Oh, I paid cash for everything," I said with deliberate casualness, watching his face change dramatically as he processed this unexpected information. "Cash," Elise repeated, her voice rising with surprise. "Mom, exactly how much money do you have saved up?" I smiled mysteriously and handed them their coffee in expensive new china cups that perfectly matched the complete dinnerware set I'd purchased to complement my renovated kitchen. "Enough to be comfortable," I said. Over the next several weeks, I continued making strategic changes to my lifestyle, each one designed to raise questions while providing no clear answers. I started taking weekend trips to places I'd always wanted to visit, but had never felt financially comfortable exploring. San Antonio for the Riverwalk and historic missions, Austin for the music scene and cultural attractions, Houston for the world-class museums and fine dining. I bought season tickets to the symphony and started attending charity galas and fundraising events at luxury hotels that charged more for a single dinner than I used to spend on groceries in an entire month. Each new activity was carefully chosen to be visible to my community while remaining somewhat mysterious about the source of my apparent newfound prosperity. Each development was inevitably reported back to my children by well-meaning neighbors, church acquaintances, and mutual friends who couldn't help but notice that quiet, careful Miriam Callahan was suddenly living very differently than she had for the previous 25 years. But I saved the biggest, most dramatic revelation for last. Because if Adrian Pierce thought calling me a peasant was the most devastating thing he could do to me, he was about to learn just how spectacularly wrong one person could be. The helicopter idea had actually been Marcus's brilliant suggestion. During one of our regular quarterly meetings to review my investment portfolio performance in early February, I mentioned that I was considering making a more definitive and unmistakable statement about my true financial circumstances. "What exactly did you have in mind?" he asked, leaning back in his leather chair with a kind of anticipatory smile that told me he was enjoying this transformation as much as I was. I honestly don't know, I admitted. Something that would make it completely impossible for them to ignore or dismiss the truth anymore. Something that would make Adrian's peasant comment look as ridiculous and ignorant as it actually was. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through possibilities. Then his smile grew considerably wider. Have you ever considered private air transportation? I laughed out loud at the suggestion. Marcus, I may be wealthy, but I'm not helicopter wealthy. That's celebrity-level extravagance. Actually, he said, pulling up detailed financial projections on his computer screen, you are significantly more helicopter wealthy than you realize. You could purchase a helicopter outright with cash and barely notice the impact on your overall net worth. Or, he continued, clearly warming to this outrageous idea, you could charter luxury helicopter service for special occasions. Make an unforgettable statement without the long-term commitment and maintenance responsibilities. The idea was so audacious, so completely unlike anything the old, invisible Miriam would have ever considered, that I knew immediately it was absolutely perfect for what I wanted to accomplish. Planning the helicopter reveal required more detailed preparation and coordination than I'd initially expected. I couldn't simply have an aircraft land in my backyard without proper authorization. The neighbors would panic and call emergency services, the local police would have questions, and the FAA would require documentation I didn't want to explain. But I also wanted the element of complete surprise that would make the moment as dramatically impactful as possible. I settled on inviting Elise and Adrian over for what I described as a special family announcement, without providing any additional details. I let them speculate freely about what it might involve, dropping cryptic hints that I had some genuinely exciting news to share, but refusing to give them any specifics that might spoil the surprise. Adrian seemed convinced that I was planning to announce my engagement to some unfortunate elderly gentleman who'd fallen for a lonely widow with more enthusiasm than financial resources. Elise wondered whether I was planning to move to a retirement community or finally admitting that I needed help managing my increasingly complex daily affairs. Neither of them came close to guessing that their supposedly impoverished peasant mother was about to give them a masterclass in assumptions and the dangers of underestimating people. The helicopter charter was scheduled to arrive at exactly 2 p.m. on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in February. I'd selected a company that specialized in luxury transportation for high-net-worth clients, the kind of service that celebrities and business executives used when they wanted to make a dramatic entrance or simply travel in style and comfort. The pilot, David Martinez, was a consummate professional with decades of experience working with wealthy clients who understood the importance of precise timing and flawless presentation. During our planning call, he assured me that he'd handled similar surprise reveals before and knew exactly how to make the maximum impact. I'd also taken care of all the practical details that such an elaborate arrangement required. The local airport authority had been properly notified about the flight plan and landing zone. My immediate neighbors had been given a polite heads-up that I was expecting an unusual delivery that might create some temporary noise and activity. The landing area in my front yard had been carefully measured, cleared of obstacles, and marked according to David's professional specifications. Everything was ready. Now I just had to wait for my unsuspecting audience to arrive. Elise and Adrian pulled into my driveway at exactly 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, as was their habit when they were curious or anxious about something. I watched from my living room window as they got out of Adrian's BMW, both of them dressed casually but expensively, both wearing expressions of barely contained curiosity mixed with what looked like mild apprehension. "Mom," Elise called as she knocked on my front door. "We're here for your mysterious announcement. I really hope everything's all right." I opened the door and greeted them with a smile that felt more genuine and anticipatory than any expression I'd worn in months. "Perfect timing as always," I said warmly. "Please come in," and make yourselves comfortable. Can I get you something to drink before we talk? For the next 15 minutes, we engaged in pleasant small talk while I served them coffee and homemade cookies, acting for all the world like a slightly nervous hostess who was working up the courage to share important family news. Adrian kept checking his expensive watch impatiently, and Elise kept glancing around the room as if looking for clues about what I might want to tell them. So, Adrian finally said, setting down his coffee cup with a definitive clink, "What's this big announcement that was so important it couldn't wait? Are you planning to sell the house? Move to a retirement community? Please tell me you're not seriously ill." I looked at both of them. These two people who were absolutely convinced they knew everything there was to know about me and my capabilities, and felt a surge of pure anticipation unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my entire life. "Actually," I said, standing up and smoothing down my dress. A beautiful designer piece that I'd selected specifically for this momentous occasion. "I have a lunch appointment downtown in about 30 minutes, and my transportation should be arriving any moment now." "Your transportation?" Elise asked, looking genuinely confused. "Did you arrange for a car service?" "Mom, I could have driven you wherever you need to go. You should have just asked." Before I could respond, we heard it. A distant sound that grew steadily louder by the second, the unmistakable, rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the air with increasing intensity. Adrian cocked his head, listening with growing puzzlement. "That's strange," he said. "It sounds like a helicopter, and it's getting really close. Must be police or emergency medical services responding to something nearby." The sound grew dramatically louder and much closer than any of us had expected. "That's incredibly close," Elise said, moving toward the front window with obvious concern. "It sounds like it's practically on top of us." I stood up gracefully and picked up my purse, the exquisite designer handbag I'd chosen to perfectly complement my outfit for this historic day. "Actually," I said, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the growing mechanical roar, "that's my ride." The expressions on their faces were everything I'd hoped for and more. Pure confusion, followed immediately by complete disbelief, followed by the gradual dawning realization that I might actually be serious about what I'd just announced. "Your ride?" Adrian repeated, his voice cracking with shock. "Miriam, helicopters don't just land in residential neighborhoods. That's not how transportation works." His words were completely drowned out by the incredible noise of the aircraft settling onto my front lawn with professional precision. Through the windows, we could all clearly see the sleek black helicopter, its rotors still turning in perfect synchronization, the pilot clearly visible through the windscreen in his crisp professional uniform. Elise's mouth fell open so wide I was genuinely concerned she might be having some kind of medical episode. Adrian looked exactly like someone who'd been struck by lightning and was still trying to process what had happened to him. "My ride is here," I repeated, raising my voice over the mechanical symphony, my tone as casual and matter-of-fact as if I were announcing that my taxi had arrived. I picked up my purse and walked confidently toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear Elise attempting to ask coherent questions, but the words weren't forming into recognizable sentences. She sounded like someone trying to speak a completely foreign language without any preparation or vocabulary. "Mom," she finally managed to articulate, her voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. "Mom, what? How is this? What is happening right now?" I turned back to look at them one final time before making my grand exit. Elise was gripping the back of her chair like she needed physical support to remain upright. Adrian was staring at me with the expression of someone who just discovered that everything they thought they knew about reality was completely wrong. "I'll be back in a few hours," I said, as casually as if I were walking to my car instead of climbing into a private helicopter. "Please make yourselves comfortable. There's more coffee in the kitchen, if you'd like some." And with that perfectly ordinary farewell, I walked out of my house and across my front lawn to where my magnificent chariot was waiting, leaving behind two people whose entire understanding of the world had just been fundamentally shattered. David greeted me with the kind of respectful professionalism that came from years of working with high-net-worth clients who considered helicopter transportation to be a perfectly routine part of their lives. He helped me into the luxurious passenger compartment, which exceeded even my expectations, all leather seats and polished wood trim, with panoramic windows that would provide spectacular views of the landscape below. As we lifted off from my front yard and climbed into the clear blue Texas sky, I looked down through the window and saw Elise and Adrian standing on my lawn, their faces turned upward toward the aircraft, watching in complete and utter amazement as their supposedly impoverished peasant mother disappeared into the heavens above them. The feeling was absolutely indescribable. It was pure triumph mixed with a satisfaction so deep and complete that it felt like vindication for every slight, every condescending comment, every single moment over the past 2 years that I'd been made to feel small and insignificant by people who should have known better. But as wonderful as that moment of takeoff was, the best part was still to come. We flew southeast toward downtown Dallas, where I had indeed made lunch reservations at 17, the most expensive and exclusive restaurant in the entire metropolitan area. Not because I was particularly hungry, my stomach was still full of excitement and anticipation, but because I wanted to complete this experience properly. I wanted to sit in a place that cost more for a single meal than Adrian probably assumed I spent on food in an entire week, and I wanted to savor every moment of this new reality. 17 occupied the entire top floor of the city's most luxurious hotel and offered breathtaking panoramic views of the Dallas skyline that took my breath away. The maitre d' greeted me by name when I arrived, having been thoroughly briefed about my unusual mode of transportation by the hotel's management staff. My table was positioned next to a floor-to-ceiling window where I could look down and see David waiting with the helicopter on the hotel's private helipad. I ordered the most expensive items on the menu, not because I needed to prove anything to the impeccable restaurant staff, but because I was finally ready to treat myself with the luxury and respect I deserved after 25 years of careful self-denial. The wine alone cost more than most families spent on their entire weekly grocery budget, and every sip was absolutely worth it. As I sat there looking out over the sprawling city while enjoying a meal that represented the kind of luxury I could have been experiencing for years if I'd chosen to, I reflected on all the times I denied myself simple pleasures in order to build security for my children's futures. All the generic groceries and secondhand clothes and delayed gratification that had allowed me to accumulate my fortune in complete secrecy. It had been worth every sacrifice and every careful decision, not just because of the money itself, though financial security was certainly valuable, but because of this moment, when I finally stopped hiding who I was and started living authentically as the accomplished, successful woman I'd become through my own intelligence and determination. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the meal with increasingly frantic text messages from Elise. "Mom, what is happening? Where are you? How did you get a helicopter? I don't understand anything right now. Are you okay? Please call me immediately. Adrian is completely freaking out. We're still at your house waiting. Please call.
Mom, I'm seriously worried.
What is going on? Please call me back. This is insane, and I need to know you're safe." I deliberately didn't respond to any of the messages right away. Let them wait. Let them sit in my newly renovated house trying to figure out how their entire understanding of reality had been turned completely upside down in the space of 30 minutes. Let them wrestle with the profoundly uncomfortable realization that they'd been mocking and dismissing someone who had more money than they'd ever seen in their lives. After I finished my leisurely lunch, complete with dessert and an after-dinner coffee that was better than anything I'd ever tasted, I asked David to take the scenic route back to my house. We flew over the heart of the city, past the lake where families were enjoying their weekend recreation, above the affluent suburban neighborhoods where people like Adrian's family lived in their impressive homes and drove their luxury cars while feeling superior to people like me. From our aerial vantage point, those houses looked small and ordinary. The expensive cars in the driveways looked like children's toys. The lives that had seemed so impressive and intimidating from ground level were revealed to be just as limited and vulnerable as everyone else's when viewed from this elevated perspective. When we finally landed back on my front lawn after what felt like a magical journey through the clouds, Elise and Adrian were exactly where I'd left them. Well, not exactly. They'd moved from inside the house to sitting on my front porch, but they both jumped up and ran toward the helicopter the moment it touched down on the grass. I thanked David sincerely for the excellent service and promised to use his company's services again very soon. He helped me down from the aircraft and handed me my purse with the kind of practiced professionalism that came from years of working with wealthy clients who considered private helicopter transportation to be perfectly routine. As David lifted off again and disappeared into the distance, leaving me standing in my front yard with my hair slightly tousled from the rotor wash, Elise finally found her voice. "Mom," she said, and I could hear genuine tears in that single word. "I don't understand what just happened. I don't understand anything about this. Where did you? I'm completely lost." Adrian looked like he was still trying to process what he'd witnessed with his own eyes. His face was pale, and he kept glancing back and forth between me and the flattened grass where the helicopter had been parked, as if he could make sense of the situation by studying the evidence hard enough. "Shall we go inside?" I suggested in my most pleasant voice. "I believe we need to have a very honest conversation about some things." We returned to my newly renovated living room, the same space that had been the backdrop for so many years of family gatherings and quiet evenings and moments both ordinary and precious. But now it felt completely different, charged with the electricity of revelation and permanent change. "Mom," Elise said again, and this time I could see that she was actually crying. "I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. How long have you been able to? Where did all this come from? I just don't understand any of this." "How long have I been wealthy?" I asked, deciding to enter confusion immediately. "About 15 years if we're talking about genuinely wealthy. About 20 years if we're just talking about financially comfortable and secure." The words hit both of them like physical blows. Adrian actually flinched backward in his chair as if I'd slapped him. 15 to 20 years? Elise whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you always said we couldn't afford things. You always worried about money. You drove that old car and bought generic groceries and shopped at thrift stores and lived so carefully and I did all of those things because building real wealth requires tremendous discipline," I interrupted gently. "Because I wanted to make absolutely certain that you and Ryan had college funds and emergency money and secure futures waiting for you. Because I learned early that if you start living like you're wealthy before you actually are wealthy, you might not stay wealthy for very long." "But Mom," Elise continued, wiping tears from her eyes, "if you've had money for so long, why did you let us think you were struggling? Why didn't you tell us the truth?" I looked at my daughter. This beautiful, confused woman who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just been revealed. "Because I never wanted you to love me for my money," I said simply. "I wanted you to respect me for who I was, not what I had. I wanted you to value the sacrifices I made and the strength I showed, not the bank account I was building. And I wanted you to develop your own work ethic and values instead of depending on family wealth." "But the helicopter," Adrian said, speaking for the first time since I'd returned from my aerial adventure. "That must have cost thousands of dollars. How much money do you actually have?" I looked directly at him, this man who had called me a peasant just 2 months earlier, and smiled with genuine satisfaction. Enough, Adrian. Significantly more than enough. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. I could practically see the gears turning frantically in both their heads as they tried to reconcile everything they thought they knew about me with the reality of what they'd just witnessed. Mom, Elise said finally, her voice small and broken, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, sweetheart. Are you doing this to punish me? The helicopter, the expensive renovations, all of it. Are you trying to make me feel terrible about how I treated you? The question was more perceptive than I'd expected from her. I considered my answer carefully. I'm not doing any of this to punish anyone, I said honestly. I'm doing it because I finally realized that I deserve to enjoy the life I worked so hard to build. For 25 years, I put everyone else's needs and comfort before my own. I sacrificed my own happiness and denied myself basic pleasures because I thought that's what good mothers were supposed to do. But the timing, she pressed. Right after Christmas, right after what Adrian said. The timing, I admitted, was definitely influenced by that evening. But not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally understood that hiding my accomplishments wasn't protecting anyone. It was just allowing people to underestimate and disrespect me. Adrian cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miriam, I owe you a sincere and profound apology. What I said at Christmas was completely inappropriate and inexcusable. I had no right to speak to you that way, regardless of what I thought your financial situation was. No, I agreed calmly. You didn't have that right. I was wrong about everything, he continued, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely humbled. I made assumptions about you based on appearances, and I treated you terribly because of those assumptions. I'm ashamed of my behavior. Apology accepted, I said. But Adrian, I want you to understand something important. The problem wasn't that you misjudged my bank account. The problem was that you thought having money gave you the right to treat someone else as less than human. That's not about wealth. That's about character. Over the following weeks, the transformation in my family relationships was remarkable and sometimes awkward. Word spread quickly through our community about Miriam Callahan's helicopter revelation, and suddenly I found myself invited to events and gatherings that I'd never been considered worthy of before. Adrian's family underwent a complete attitude adjustment toward me. His mother, who had barely acknowledged my existence at the wedding, suddenly wanted to have regular lunch dates and discuss my investment strategies. His father started asking for my advice on real estate opportunities and treating me like an equal in their business conversations. The change in their behavior was gratifying in some ways, but also deeply disappointing. It confirmed that their previous dismissal of me had been entirely based on their assessment of my financial worth rather than my value as a person. Ryan was absolutely fascinated by the business aspects of my success and wanted to understand every detail of how I'd built my wealth so quietly and effectively over the years. As an accountant, he appreciated the careful planning and discipline that had gone into my investment strategy. Mom, he said during one of our conversations, I have to admit I'm a little hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth about your financial situation. I could have helped you optimize your tax strategies years ago. You're right, I acknowledged. I should have brought you into my confidence sooner. I was so focused on maintaining the secret that I didn't consider how my expertise in your field could have benefited us both. But it was Elise's transformation that mattered most to me. The shock of discovering her mother's hidden wealth had forced her to examine her own attitudes and assumptions in ways that were clearly uncomfortable, but ultimately necessary for her personal growth. I've been thinking constantly about what you said, she told me during one of our weekly coffee dates at the upscale cafe I now frequented openly. About how I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as someone to be managed or pitted. I hate that I became that kind of person. I hate that I let Adrian's attitudes influence me so much. Marriage does change people, I said, stirring cream into my expensive latte. When you love someone, it's natural to start seeing the world through their eyes, especially when their perspective seems more sophisticated or worldly than your own. But that's no excuse for forgetting who raised me, Elise said firmly. You worked multiple jobs to pay for my college education. You taught me how to balance a checkbook and change a tire and stand up for myself when people tried to take advantage of me. You showed me what real strength and determination look like every single day. And I repaid all of that by letting my husband call you a peasant and actually laughing like it was amusing. You made a serious mistake, I said gently. We all make mistakes. The important thing is what we learn from them and how we choose to behave differently in the future. I've learned that I never want to be the kind of person who judges others by their possessions or their apparent social status, she said. I want to be the kind of person you raised me to be, someone who sees people for who they really are, not what they appear to be on the surface. It wasn't a perfect resolution, of course. There were still awkward moments and uncomfortable conversations, and the lingering knowledge that our relationship had been damaged in ways that might never fully heal. But it was a genuine beginning, and that was more than I'd dared to hope for just a few months earlier. As for Adrian, his transformation was gradual, but seemed authentic. He made consistent efforts to change his attitude and behavior toward me, apologizing repeatedly for his Christmas Eve comment and demonstrating that he understood how deeply hurtful his words had been. He started including me in conversations about business and investments, seeking my perspective on deals he was considering and treating my opinions with genuine respect. Whether his change was motivated by sincere remorse or by the knowledge that he'd insulted someone with significantly more money than his family would ever possess, I couldn't say with certainty. But his behavior toward me remained consistently respectful and considerate from that day forward, and that was sufficient for me. The helicopter became something of a symbol in our family and community. Not just of my wealth, but of my refusal to be invisible or dismissed any longer. I used charter services regularly for business trips to check on my various properties and for weekend getaways to places I'd always wanted to visit. Partly because it was genuinely convenient and efficient, and partly because I enjoyed the reminder of that perfect moment when I'd finally shown everyone who I really was. Marcus was absolutely delighted by my transformation and started suggesting additional ways I might enjoy my wealth more openly and generously. We discussed purchasing a vacation home in the mountains, buying a boat for lake recreation, and even acquiring my own helicopter if I decided I wanted the convenience of private aviation on a regular basis. Remember, Miriam, he reminded me during one of our quarterly meetings, the whole point of accumulating wealth was never to hoard it indefinitely. The goal was to achieve enough financial security to live the life you wanted. So, what kind of life do you want to live now? It was an excellent question, one I'd never allowed myself to seriously consider during all those years of careful saving and strategic reinvestment. What kind of life did I want? I wanted to travel to places I'd only read about in books and magazines, Europe, Asia, Australia, destinations that had seemed impossibly exotic and expensive during my years of careful budgeting. I wanted to support causes I cared deeply about without worrying about the financial impact. I wanted to spoil my grandchildren in ways I'd never been able to spoil my own children, creating memories and opportunities that would enrich their lives. But most importantly, I wanted to continue being seen and respected for who I truly was, not just the wealthy woman I'd become, but the strong, intelligent, determined woman I'd always been underneath the modest exterior. The peasant comment that had hurt so deeply had actually been an unexpected gift. It had forced me to stop hiding my achievements and start living authentically. It had shown me that I was tired of making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort zones. And it had given me the motivation to reveal my true self in the most dramatic way possible. 6 months after the helicopter incident, I decided to host a formal dinner party at my home. Not the casual family gathering of the past, but an elegant event that would properly showcase both my renovated house and my new lifestyle. I hired a professional catering service, bought expensive wines, and sent engraved invitations to family and select friends. The evening was absolutely perfect. The table was set with my finest china and crystal. The menu featured dishes prepared by one of the city's best chefs, and the wine selection included bottles that cost more individually than I used to spend on groceries in an entire week. Ryan and his family attended, along with Elise and Adrian, plus several couples I'd become friendly with through my new social activities. Everyone was dressed elegantly, the conversation was stimulating and pleasant, and the atmosphere was warm while maintaining an air of sophistication I'd never attempted before. As we sat around the table enjoying our expensive meal and genuinely connecting with each other, I caught Adrian's eye and smiled. He smiled back, and for the first time since I'd known him, his expression seemed completely genuine and free of condescension. "This is absolutely wonderful, Mom," Elise said, raising her wine glass in an impromptu toast. "Thank you for creating such a beautiful evening and for sharing your success with all of us." "Thank you for finally seeing me," I replied, raising my own glass. "For truly seeing me as I really am." As we toasted to family and new beginnings and the importance of never underestimating anyone, I felt a satisfaction that went far deeper than any helicopter ride or expensive meal could provide. I had reclaimed not just my dignity and my rightful place in my own family, but my fundamental sense of self-worth that I'd been suppressing for far too long. And I had learned something crucial about myself in the process. I wasn't just wealthy, I was formidable. I was a woman who had built something remarkable through her own intelligence and determination, and I deserved to be proud of that accomplishment rather than hiding it away. A year after the helicopter revelation, I was invited to speak at a regional conference for women entrepreneurs and investors. The organizers had heard about my story and wanted me to share my experience with other women who might be building wealth quietly or struggling with visibility in male-dominated financial circles. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of accomplished women, I felt a confidence I'd never experienced before in my life. 25 years ago, I was a young widow with 2 children and almost no money. I made a decision that day to never be financially vulnerable again. But I also made another decision, to hide my growing success because I was afraid of how people might treat me differently. I paused, thinking about that Christmas Eve dinner and everything that had followed. What I learned is that hiding your accomplishments doesn't protect you, it just allows others to underestimate you. And being underestimated, while sometimes strategically useful, can also be profoundly damaging to your sense of self-worth. The audience was completely engaged, many of them nodding with recognition. So my advice to all of you is this: build your wealth quietly if you choose, but don't hide your competence. Don't make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. And never, ever let anyone treat you like less than you are, because you might be the only one who knows your true worth. The standing ovation was gratifying, but what meant more were the women who approached me afterward with their own stories of hidden success and quiet strength. That evening, I flew home in my recently purchased helicopter. Yes, I had finally bought one and hired David as my personal pilot, feeling more fulfilled than I had in decades. I had found my voice and my place in the world, not as someone's poor relative or invisible mother, but as Miriam Callahan, successful investor, philanthropist, and woman who refused to be underestimated. The peasant was dead. Long live the Queen. As I looked down at the lights of my city spread out below me, I smiled at the memory of that scared young widow who had started this journey 25 years earlier. She could never have imagined that she would become this. A woman who literally owned the sky, who commanded respect wherever she went, and who had transformed her pain into purpose and her sacrifice into strength. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that the most devastating revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to remain invisible when you deserve to be seen. And I was definitely just getting started. Thank you for joining me on my incredible journey from Invisible Widow to Helicopter Flying Powerhouse. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community so you never miss our latest true stories of women who refuse to be underestimated. Remember, truth really is stranger than fiction, and every story of transformation deserves to be heard. Until next time, this is Her True Stories.